Genesis chapter number 4. Genesis chapter number 4, believe it or not, this is kind of a lead-in to our Wednesday night series that we're going to start in February sometime with the book of Job. We are going to look at the book of Job and look into it, so I thought this kind of fits in. I've got the next 3 Sunday nights for myself. And then the other guys are all champing and at the bit asking, and so we'll share it around again in February and March. But for the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 4, 5, and 6. Now, Genesis chapter number 6 is always a bit of a fun one to have a look at, particularly the first 6 verses or 12 verses. And to be honest, I've never heard Genesis 4, 5, and 6 preached in any meaningful or any kind of way here. And I grew up around these parts, never really heard any preaching out of these particular passages, so we're going to do that. These are the years between Cain and Seth leading up to the flood is the time period. So this is before the flood, and Genesis chapter number 4, I'm going to read the entire chapter. You follow along if you're able to do so. As I read the entire chapter, you'll see it on the board behind me. We're looking at tonight the way of Cain. That doesn't come from this chapter, it comes from another passage which I'll make mention of. But we're just going to look at this and see what the world was like in this particular time period. Genesis 4 verse 1 says, "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel to his brother, and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from the face of shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth thee, Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech, and Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah, and Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of such as handle the harp and the organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artifice in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said he, hath appointed me another seed, instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth To him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Fascinating, interesting chapter that we have before us here in Genesis chapter number 4. We've titled it The Way of Cain. It's an interesting passage, and it's written primarily. And we mentioned a few weeks ago that the promise of Jesus, that Jesus being the Messiah, he being the Christ, one of the reasons that they struggled getting their head around it is that the prophecies had been prophesied for so long. For thousands and thousands of years, literally 4,000 years, they knew that the promised Messiah was prophesied to come. And so Jesus shows up and he says, I am he. I am the Christ. I am the one who has been prophesied for thousands and thousands of years. And they're thinking, you? We're not sure. We know that he's coming, but we're not sure whether you're him or not. But we know, and we looked at that particular morning, that all the way back to Eve was aware that there was a prophecy where the promised seed was going to come. Now, Eve had it in her mind when God spoke to her and said, from thee shall be a seed shall come, that she had it in her mind that, man, the next son that she has is going to be the promised seed. So Cain, in her mind, was the one that's going to be the promised one that's going to deliver them out of the sin and the bondage that they had got themselves into. Little did she know it was going to be a lot longer than what she realized. And so when it says there in verse number 1 that Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. It's as if them saying, yes, this is the promised seed. This is the one. This is the one who's going to deliver us from sin and reverse the curse. And there was great optimism over who Cain was. And then, as we said, talking about being disappointed, he was vastly not the promised one from God. And you go on and you read about that, and we'll mention that. But at the very end of this chapter, verse number 25, after Abel has been killed, Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. Seth is the one who is mentioned here. Now, Seth is a replacement. The name means replacement, or it means in the place of, I think is what Seth means. So they now have Seth. Now Seth comes along. I think Adam was 130 years. Look at the genealogies here in just a moment, just to keep you awake on a Sunday night. Nothing like a bit of genealogy work to help you with your awake status. But 130 years of age was Adam when he had Seth. Don't go there yet. Oh, I was speaking like as if that was cold, but sorry, Ben's back there. I should speak more politely to Ben. We'll get there. But he was 130. He was 130 when he had Seth. So Cain and Abel, who are already there's a period of time here that may have taken place, maybe even 100 years, that has taken place with Cain and Abel, with this situation with Cain and Abel, when they've brought their offerings before God. Abel brings one that is a blood sacrifice that is accepted of God, and they would have known from the very beginning that God expects a blood sacrifice to cover their sin. That's not something that was a developed Bible truth later on when Moses came on and learnt those things at Mount Sinai, because God killed the lamb to cover their sins with the skins of animals. And so there was blood that was shed from the very beginning, and so these sacrifices started from the very beginning, blood sacrifices, the innocent for the guilty, to cover the guilt and the shame of the guilty. Started very, very early. So they knew that. Cain, though, brings his work of his hands, the fruit of his hands, the bananas and the pineapples and the whatever else he had tilled, and he brings that before God. God rejects it, outright rejects what Cain has done, because it is the work of his own hands, and it's not how salvation is made. It's not atonement for sins. Atonement for sins is not made by the works of our hands. It is only through the shed blood. So he rejected that, accepted Abel's. Cain then gets envious. The Bible says that he slew his brother out of envy. in well, 1 John 3:12, let me read you these verses. It says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one. Who's the wicked one? It's the devil. So Cain, according to the Bible, is of that wicked one. It's a very clearly established biblical principle, is that Cain is of the wicked one. Cain is of the devil. Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Why did he kill him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. Marvel not, my brethren, if the world hates you. So he's saying, John is saying, Cain killed his brother because his deeds were evil and his brothers were good. Isn't that the craziest thing, to kill someone? I'm killing you because you're good and I'm not. That's what it was. It's envy is what that is that there is envy, and he killed his brother for envy. And Jesus was delivered up for envy. These are all traits of the devil, and he was of that wicked one. Jude chapter 1, there's only one chapter in Jude, but verse 11 says this, woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, which is where we get the title from, the way of Cain. What is the way of Cain? Well, we find here it is one of envy, it is one of hatred, it is one of the works of their own hands. It's not true religion before God. So in this, God rejects Cain, gives him opportunities to repent, gives him opportunities to do right, and Cain rejects God. And look what happens here. In verse number 13, Cain is decrying what God has done to him and the punishment that he bears. And Cain said unto him, my punishment is greater than I can bear. In Genesis 4:13, he says, behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. And look at verse number 16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. So at this particular stage, 120, 125 years, 130 years into the existence into mankind's history, they would have all been together. Adam, Eve, the sons and the daughters, and that's often the question that is asked by infidels, by unbelievers. Oh yeah, where did Cain get his wife from? Well, Cain got his wife from his sisters. It's not rocket science, and it's not a scandal that Cain got his wife from his sisters. It's not until 2,000 plus years later that God gives the law in the Leviticus not to marry your sister or those that nearer of kin, because the genetic code is broken down greatly and the curse takes its effect. And now when you are too closely linked, even today, it's against the law to marry a close relation, because the genetics of it produce strange children, produce genetic defects. Well, that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at the very beginning. The genetics were pure and good, and marrying the sister didn't produce genetic defects. Abraham, even after the flood, married his half-sister. So the genetic issue wasn't the same at the very beginning. So Cain married his sister. I have no issue with that. That's not rocket science to get around. It's not difficult to get around. And he goes out with his wife, and he goes out to he left. So you can imagine this close-knit family, Adam, Eve, sons, daughters. Cain is in there as well. And now Abel has killed his brother. Cain has killed his brother Abel, and Cain leaves. It's very important in the story, and it's very important in the Bible story to understand. Cain is actually cast out, and he is separate and distinct from Adam, Eve, and the rest of the population at this particular time. So now he goes off, and he has now gone out to the east of Eden, to the land of Nod, and it says here with his wife, he knew, verse 17, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Now don't be confused. This is not the same Enoch that is later translated because he walked with God. That Enoch comes through the lineage of Seth. But this this story here is giving a lineage of Cain. You find now the genealogy here of Cain is Cain had Enoch, and Enoch, it says in verse 18, had Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech, he had 2 wives. First guy to have 2 wives. He takes 2 wives, Zillah and Adah bare Jabal and his brother Jubal, and Zillah had Tubal-Cain and his sister Naamah. So there is this genealogy, this lineage of Cain. So Cain is separated, he's cast out, he goes out by himself with his wife, and he has children, and he has this city that he builds, calls it Enoch, and they start to develop their own culture. They start to develop their own identity, separate and distinct from Adam and Eve and Seth and those others that were there in the original group. Here is this other one that is Cain's lineage, and it distinctly lays out Cain's lineage, distinct and separate from what we read in chapter number 5, which then follows through the lineage of Seth. So you have these 2 lineages. Now, if you go to we can look at this. So Seth has this, all right? So if this is chapter 5, what you see on your screen is my rendition of Genesis chapter number 5. So if you were to read Genesis 5, look at this. I'll skip through it and you'll see it on the screen up here. So this is the book of the generation of Adam. So they had books, get this. They had books before the flood, which means they could write before the flood. Our world, this is completely off topic, it's just that it's here and I just chased a rabbit. I saw its fluffy little tail. Our world is so ingrained with evolution that we are slowly evolving and getting smarter and working these things out. And they would say that cuneiform tablets came in Sumeria and with the Sumerians and all those kinds of things. But before the flood, there was the book of the generations of Adam. They were very knowledgeable before then. They didn't start dumb and go smart. It's probably the exact opposite. They started smart and now we're getting dumber. It's just that knowledge has gone the other way. Knowledge has started small and got big. But they were smart people. God created Adam and Eve. They were brilliantly intellectual people. So they had this book of the generation of Adam, and in that day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. Adam lived 130 years. Now, on this screen, the red represents 130 years. This is me. I measured the screen and then did all the math and worked out how long each line needs to be in accordance to this. So it's to scale representation, all right, of that many years, all right? So Adam was 130 and he has Seth. It's not his first child. There's a genealogy of Seth that is picked up in Genesis chapter number 5. He already had at least Cain and Abel, and Cain had a wife, so there's at least 3 before Seth comes along. No doubt there was more. In 130 years of being married, probably more. And 130. So Adam lived 130 years and begat his son in his own likeness after his image, and he called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. So he lived another 800 years after he begat Seth. Now, if we were to go through this, that's how the rest of the genealogy reads. I don't have the numbers before me. I didn't write it on the screen, but you'll find that Seth lived X amount of years, had Enos lived X amount of years, had Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, all the way down to Methuselah, Lamech. I think Methuselah and Lamech, from memory, they're like 180 before they had kids. They were a bit slow getting away there. And then Noah comes along, and he's 500 years before he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We don't know which one's older. We don't know if they're triplets, or it just says Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One of them is the oldest, and they are mentioned all together as one. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth, he has them at 500 when he has that. That's strange in today's age, but then when the world and the situation that it was back then, healthier, living longer, and they lived that. Now, I find these things interesting, these graphic representations, because you find that Adam was alive at the same time Methuselah was alive. Generations and generations were all living together. So the population would have been massive, would have been big. They were having kids, so when Jared's having kids, Adam might also still be having kids. It's just a strange thing to think about. Just think that the population was quite numerous at this stage. But this is the lineage of Genesis chapter number 5. From Adam to Seth to Enoch to Canaan to Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, and on through that lineage. But Genesis chapter number 4 shows a distinct and separate. Do you actually pull up the next slide if you could? Shows a distinct and separate lineage. Two separate ways. Is it there? It's on the screen now. So this is something I drew this afternoon. Okay, maybe not. But comes from the Panoramic Bible Study, I think is what it is. But he draws these things, and it's a representation of what you're reading in Genesis 4 and Genesis 5. That there was the original Adam, Eve, and their descendants, and then Enoch comes out. He is separate. He is left from the presence of the Lord. He is driven out. He goes and starts his own city, separate and distinct from this other one. And this other lineage. So there's these two lines that take place very early on in the book of Genesis. And so from the very beginning, humanity is divided between this line of Seth and this line of Cain. Now, I don't have a representation for the line of Cain, but in reading this, you can understand that there was Adam, Cain, down Cain's line. Adam, Cain, and then there's Enoch, not the same Enoch. Irad, Mahila, Methusael, Lamech, not the same Lamech, and then Jabal, Jubal. So they got down to 8. The genealogy is 8, and no doubt beyond that 8, there is more. Just like the genealogy of Seth, that one goes through to 10 and 11. All right. So understand this: there's these two paths that are represented from Genesis 4 and Genesis number 5, separate and distinct. So what was this city that Cain built? What was it like? Do we know anything about it? Well, we do. It's written right here if you paid attention. It says here in verse number 17, where he built the city, Enoch, called it Enoch. What's this city like? This distinct city that's separate and distinct from those of the rest. Well, there was sons and daughters that were born there. So the population started to multiply in this city of Nod, or Enoch, in the land of Nod. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. So there was polygamy taking place in this city, at least started by Lamech. You also have in Adar, Adar bare Jabal, and Jabal was the father of such that dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. Now Cain was a tiller of the land. Cain was a shepherd. He looked after the sheep. But it's interesting to say that Jabal, though, Abel was the sheep, would look after the sheep. But it says here Jabal was the father of such that look after cattle in tents. So he's obviously invented the tent, to this pack-up thing that you can pack up and move to the next place, this little house, and pop it up somewhere else, and you go to wherever the cattle are going, and so he's building up this cattle empire. He's like this early rancher of sorts, that he is the one that's father of this, and so he's a businessman, it seems, and he builds up quite a reputation here as being a cattle rancher. Then you go on and you find that you have his brother, and his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such that handle the harp and organ. They're one of the two main fundamental instruments. wind and string. So you have the pipe and the organ that he has made mention of, the harp, sorry, and the organ, so the stringed and wind, and he plays them, and music is brought about. And then it says in verse 22, and Zillah, she would bear Tubal-Cain, and instructor of every artifice in brass and iron. So he is skilled in these brass and iron, which is new, and so there's great developments. It's like this city is cutting edge. It's state of the art. It's some great things are happening, and great developments are happening in the land of Nod, in the city of Enoch, where Cain is and his descendants are, and they're swelling and they're getting bigger. And it says here, and there were artificers in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, some commentators in reading this make mention that maybe the reason that Naamah is made mention of is that maybe for her beauty and maybe for her fine arts, maybe the ability to sing, and so there is her half-brother playing pipes and organs, and now Naamah is a singer or something. But you can see that this city is developing. There's an arts center that is coming out of this city, and there's scientific discoveries that are coming out of Cain, and it's a developing city, it's a developing culture. Now, someone else put it like this, that the way of Cain, Cain was brilliant, but godless. God was not over there. He had already made his decision. And over in this city now, there's art and culture, and there is polygamy, and there's also murder that's taking place over there because Lamech says, I've killed someone, he wounded me, and I killed him in reply. And so this city just seems like a city that is just built on the fleshly nature of humanity. It's building in this life and in this way, and this amazing city that is arising from the ashes or arising from the dirt of sorts. This great civilization over there. Brilliant but godless. What a civilization, one commentator said, that became completely absorbed in their own personal property, their own entertainment, and gave way to their own lusts. That's kind of what you find here. In this city, in this city that God had cursed. He cursed Cain, and his descendants now continue on. And there's great developments and great culture and great arts that are coming out, but it's godless. And so you have those over there, and you have those in the Seth lineage, though, that hadn't separated. Enoch was sent out and separated. You find here in verse 25 of chapter 4, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, she said, had appointed me another son instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. And then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Godly or ungodly? Godly. They're calling upon the name of the Lord. So Seth and his lineage, those that were separate and distinct from Cain, they are over here calling on the name of the Lord. In his lineage you find godliness, those who fear God. You find Enoch, who walked with God and was not, for God took him, translated him and took him out. You find Noah, a man of righteousness found in his generation. But you find with that picture before, or you hear, that in these two lineages, they both start to swell and they start to multiply. We saw before, they had children and children and children and lived for a long time and had many children. And so the line of Seth grew and multiplied, and the city of Enoch over there with Cain and his descendants grew and multiplied and also was greatly developed as a city and arts. These two cities, these two multitudes started to grow, and the earth started to be filled with people. One over here, this group of Seth and Adam, and this one over here of Cain and his descendants in that city. Two separate and distinct. I don't want to go too much further on this tonight, because I want you to get this in your mind, what is happening in Genesis 4 and Genesis 5. Because if you don't get this two separations and this multitude that is taking place, Genesis 6 you can go in 1,000 different directions because you've just completely skipped Genesis 4 and Genesis 5. You're going to come to Genesis number 6 and you're going to read something like this. I'm going to give you this in advance so you know where we're going. And this week and next week are not going to be practical. The third week is going to be a practical element of, so what? What does this mean? So what? How can we use this today? But Genesis 6 says this, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. That's what's taking place here in this picture. Men is multiplying, and they multiplied from two primary sources. Seth's lineage and Enoch's lineage. And they started to multiply and multiply and multiply. Now what happens when they started to multiply? Well, the Cain one, they were greatly advanced. Remember, in their art and their culture and their music and their beauty and all these kinds of things. And the Seth line, they just over here serving God, not doing the things of Cain. But what starts to happen? Well, it says that the sons of men saw the sons of God saw the daughters of men. And there was a mingling that started to take place. And a bringing these two separate and distinct lineages and these lines started to come together and mesh and marry. And the line of Seth is like the narrow way which leads to heaven. And the way of Cain is of that wicked one which leads to hell and destruction. Now these two mutually opposed ways you're going to find in chapter number 6 come together and start to mingle as one, and you're going to find some things that are ungodly arise out of this mingling and this mixing of Genesis 4 and Genesis 5. 4 plus 5 equals 6 in this particular Genesis math. And so we're going to look at that next week. Next week I'm going to look at Genesis 6. Now, some people will say this. I said I was going to quit, now I'm going to say one more thing. Some people will say this. Some people in our church, some of you sitting here might be a believer or might take this interpretation, that the sons of God means angels and the daughters of men means mankind. So this angelic being and angels came and procreated with mankind and produced this half angel, half man race which started to dominate and take over the world. Some of you may have never heard that before. Some of you may have. Nephilim come out of that. And so all of those things, I'm going to look at that next week. Next week, I'm basically going to tell you why I don't believe that. And some of you may believe that. I'm not here to split the church. I'm just saying, I'm going to tell you, I'm in the position that I get to be the one who teaches the Word of God here at this local church. I'm going to tell you why I believe it and why my position is from the Word of God. And you might say, well, my position is from the Word of God as well, and I believe differently. So we're going to look next week at why I don't believe that it was angels and mankind procreating and producing some half-breed, half-hybrid demi-humanity. And then in the week 3, I'm going to tell you what I do believe about this passage and why I believe it is vitally important for us today to get this right and how it fits in the whole entire Bible. But for tonight, let me just suffice to say, there is a way of Cain, and it's not godliness, it's ungodliness, and it's against God. And there is a lineage here of Cain's lineage and Seth's lineage, separate and distinct from each other. The platform has been set, the stage has been set for what we're about to read in Genesis chapter number 6. I'm not going to do any more than that. Connor, come and lead us in a song, would you? Take your hymn books, we're going to close tonight.